Good morning, evening, or midnight, as the case may be. Welcome to this session, Unlocking Cage-Free Progress, Harnessing Market Mechanisms for Transformative Change in Asian Egg Production. Now, Global Food Partners Impact Incentives Program, which our speaker today is going to be presenting about, is pioneering a market-driven approach to accelerate the transition to cage-free egg production in Asia. Through a flexible system of cage-free credits, food companies can offset their use of conventional eggs, meet sustainability commitments, and directly support local producers in upgrading their operations. This model overcomes supply challenges, rewards producers for higher welfare practices, and empowers both corporates and farmers to achieve measurable change. This session explores how strategic financial mechanisms are catalyzing responsible sourcing and market transformation in Asian egg supply chains. Now, Jaya is the co-founder and chief operating officer at Global Food Partners, an international consulting firm advancing animal welfare standards across Asia, with a focus on cage-free production systems. Previously, he's served as managing director of Humane Society International, India, and was founding director of the Animal Law Center at Nalsar School of Law, Hyderabad. Renowned for advising governments on legislation, training legal professionals, and developing innovative solutions for higher welfare food supply chains, Jaya is widely respected for his pioneering contributions in animal protections and legal reforms, and I hope you will join me in welcoming him. As a reminder, if you have questions for the speakers, you can submit them via the Swapcard app. I'll be selecting a mix of your questions and some prepared ones during our Q&A. We will also have office hours following the session in Gathered Round for continued discussion. Now, please join me in welcoming Jaya to the stage.
Thank you so much, Keller, and thanks everyone for joining. It's really exciting for me to present on market mechanisms for cage-free reform. My name is Jayasimha. You can call me Jaya. I'm based in Singapore and joining you all from Singapore. So, as Keller said, we founded Global Food Partners about 6 years ago to solve a peculiar problem that we were facing in Asia. Asia, where vast majority of land animals, farmed animals are housed, we were seeing that there was very little animal welfare progress that was happening. And in terms of animal welfare, when you really look at it, there are three ways in which I guess one could potentially help make the lives of the animals better. The first one would be legislation, right? European Union, California, states in the US, where there are legislations to basically phase out these extreme cruelty that happens with intensive confinement. The second option is obviously corporate commitments. You have corporates who make commitment to source cage-free eggs, and obviously when they change, the supply chain goes ahead and changes. The third option is obviously working with individual consumers and asking them to change their purchasing habit. When you start looking into these three possible interventions and put it within the impact, neglectedness, and tractability framework, you realize that when you work on legislation, it's got the highest amount of impact because when something becomes outlawed, obviously the entire industry changes. But in Asia, we were looking that the public policy atmosphere just wasn't there. These weren't countries where lobbying or even like ballot measures that happens in the US was something that is legally recognized. And so it was really hard. So even though legislation had a huge amount of impact, we realized that it actually has very little tractability. Then came corporate commitments, and corporate commitments admittedly has lesser amount of impact in comparison to legislation. But what we saw was there was some amount of tractability there because most of these companies who had cage-free commitments were making considerably good progress in global north. And we wanted to see how are we able to take that particular change and bring it to Asia. The third option was, could we just work with consumers? And we know that there's very low impact, very low tractability when it comes to that because just consumers overall vote differently on the ballot, vote differently on their wallet. So it's really hard to hedge the whole life of animals based on consumer behavior. So looking at this problem, we decided that the best way to get most number of animals out of cages, that's what we focus on, is to set up a consulting, and Global Food Partners works on both ends of the supply chain. So we work with food businesses who are looking to source cage-free eggs, who have commitments to cage-free eggs to help them have a roadmap and transition their supply chain. On the other hand, we also provide technical support to farmers so that they're able to run a good cage-free farm. The entire premise of our work is that for animal welfare to be viable, it has to be economically viable. If the farmer is not making money, or if it doesn't make economic sense to the companies, then obviously they're not going to sustain the change overall. So, in the past years of our existence, we worked with major food and retail around the world who have operations in Asia. And this is just Compass Group, what's one of the world's largest food service company, which runs Canteen. We helped develop a roadmap for them. Accor Hotel, Superindo, which is a supermarket chain in Indonesia. So we've been like supporting food and hospitality business across the emerging markets. As I said earlier, one of the other things that we do is work with farmers, because a lot of times getting the birds out of cages and setting up a cage-free farm is easier said than done. There is a reason why these birds were kept in cages, right? In terms of just like efficiency and management issues. And a lot of time we were realizing that farmers in Asia just didn't have the ecosystem to transition out of cage free. So when we're looking at either learning stock sportsmanship, learning how to design the farm, and the existing model was that you take the farmers to Europe, show them. That's what like existing animal welfare organizations did, and say, oh, here, why don't you go back and set? And these farmers would come back to Asia and say, you folks have lost your mind. There is no way that we can replicate a farm of that kind in Asia just because of capital expenditure, access to money, climate, many other things. So we decided that, well, what we really need is to set up a relatable role model. And to that extent, we set a model farm in Indonesia, a model farm in China, a model farm in India, which are training centers. So where farmers can come and get trained. Other than that, we have scientific officers who go on farm and work on the transition from cage to cage free. And the entire idea here is that if we are able to increase the on farm efficiency without any compromise on animal welfare, then it becomes more economically viable or the economic viability increases for the farms and they continue to exist as cage free. Because the last thing you really want is a farmer transitions to cage free, they have like a major feather pecking or a cannibalism or vent pecking outbreak or a lot of floor eggs. All of these are common problems that can happen in a cage free system. And the news just spreads because most of the farming community conversations is the network impact. And then you kind of realize that people are like, oh my God, you go cage free and the birds start eating each other up because there is a cannibalism outbreak and just the conversion becomes much more steeper. So we wanted to ensure that in every country where we operate, we work with a couple of farmers who are relatable role models and get that farm to transition to cage free so that others are able to look and push the transition as well. So while I've been talking about cage free for so long, it's taking a step back as to why cage free is important. From an animal welfare point of view, it's probably one of the largest issues in terms of in land animals. Most of egg-laying hens around the world are confined in battery cages where they're given less than an A4 size sheet of space their entire life. These animals can't stand up straight, turn around, spread their wing, perch, lay egg in a nest box, all of which are really important for the bird's welfare. In fact, a lot of these are actually not even learned behavior. These are innate behavior that exists in the birds. So you can take a bird who spent her entire life in cages and take the bird out of cage, and you'll immediately see that perching, dust bathing, laying egg in a nest box, all of this just comes to the bird naturally. So it's obviously something that's really important from the bird's point of view. The other issue that we've also seen is that conventional battery cages do not provide an access to nest box. which is really important from the bird's point of view. There are these weighted door studies that are done where a bird is deprived of food and has to push two weighted doors, and one has access to food and one has access to nest box. And we've seen even at about 48 hours of feed deprivation, the bird always will choose to push more pressure to get access to a nest box, even like foregoing food when she's food deprived. So again, it's really, really important from an animal welfare point of view. And the reason why we focus on Asia, as I said earlier, was most of these animals are in Asia, and in Asia, most of them continue to be in cages. Uh, but how is it looking globally, right? As in, the cage-free market around the world is obviously growing. In the United States alone, in the past 10 years, we've now seen a massive transformation that has happened of the egg industry. About more than 40% of the egg-laying hens, US, which is the second or the third largest producers of egg, depending on how avian influenza is doing, has transitioned itself to cage-free. And it's largely been catalyzed by corporate commitment. And then I guess what happened with the top up where the ballot measures and state legislations that ended up either prohibiting having these birds in cages, and then the ballot measure that happened in California, which followed in many other states of the US, was making it illegal to sell eggs from cages in that particular state. So obviously that drove a lot of change. So you'll see that over 2,600 companies, a lot of them have cage-free commitment, but and also to their credit, at least in the global north, most of these companies are implementing their commitment. But when it comes to Asia, we realize that from a food company's point of view, what they're really looking for is the three R's of their supply chain, right? They want a reasonably priced cage-free eggs. There's no doubt that cage-free eggs are going to cost more than caged eggs purely because of feed consumption. 70 to 80% of cost of an egg is in its feed. When you keep an animal in cage free, that means that the animal ends up expending a lot more energy. When the animal expends a lot more energy, so she ends up eating a lot more or a little bit more, and that has direct impact on the cost of the feed. But how much is that impact is the question. In many places where it's done at scale, the cost of production at farm gate is about 23-30% more, not more than that. But when in Asia, when we were looking at the cost of buying these cage-free eggs could be 100, 200% more in many markets, at least when we started to work in this region. And things are changing now, obviously. So they're looking at like a reasonably priced supply chain. The second thing is they want a reliable partner. So their existing cage supplier is somebody with whom they've had years or decades of partnership. They're reliable. There are like a lot of supply chain risks that can happen in these countries. It could be like a flood, a volcano outbreak, earthquake, a disease outbreak, anything that could happen. So they really want some sort of a reliable supply chain and a resilient supply chain. And when we started to look into this, we realized that from a food and hospitality sector, other than the fact that they couldn't find these reliable, reasonably priced, as well as a resilient supply chain, a lot of these companies were buying liquid eggs. And in many markets, liquid eggs were just not available, primarily because when you're running a liquid egg factory, you need a minimum order quantity, which is large enough. But these cage-free commitments and the cage-free orders didn't meet the minimum order quantity. So even if companies were willing, factories couldn't process what they needed. High cost, as I said, in some markets were also a prohibition. And the third place was there was just like no supply to remote locations. So you can imagine a country like Indonesia, where you have a large island, Java, where most people live, but there are farms there. But then hospitality has presence across. They have it in Bali, they have it in Sumatra, they have it in many other places. And it's really hard for them to just get these local eggs at a small volume. So this was the three major issues from the hospitality sector point of view. So basically, when you look at it, and I'm just going to pick one of them, you have a remote location, like they cannot buy cage-free eggs from a cage-free farm. and companies are like, too bad, we're not able to meet this commitment. And this isn't even the question of like companies not wanting to do something. This is where companies want to do something. It's just that there isn't a supply chain. Like there's nothing that anybody could do. And you could say, well, could you not just create the supply chain? It's just that eggs end up being a business of economies of scale. And you need to have like a particular number of even cage-free birds for it to be economically feasible. And also, egg productions are highly concentrated in geographies, and there is an ecosystem of a feed mill, a veterinary supply, housing equipment manufacturers, technicians, veterinarians, all of that is required. So it's not just easy to say, well, why don't you just set up a cage-free farm here? Because there isn't an infrastructure that supports these cage-free farms. So what we came up was, well, if there's a remote location, why don't we then look at existing commodities as to how do they solve it? And we obviously looked at credits as one of the option. So we're like, okay, let the company just buy, uh, continue to buy their conventional or caged eggs from their existing farmers. They buy cage-free credits from cage-free farmer, and their commitment is met, and the cost is saved. So how does this work? With our cage-free credits, now companies ended up having like three different ways in which they could fill. So the counterfactual of global food partners not existing and our cage-free credit option not existing was like companies had only one option. They had to buy 100% physical cage-free eggs, or they have to work with their existing supplier to transition for cage-free eggs. And for all the reasons that I said before, that was hard, or even if they wanted to do, it's difficult. So what we gave was two other new options. We said that, all right, source physical cage-free eggs wherever possible, and you can bridge the gap with cage-free credits. Or you can also basically just like buy cage-free credits fully and meet your animal welfare commitment. In terms of like just getting birds out of cages, all of these three, it just does not matter because you get the same number of birds out of cages. It was just that when you had only option number one, even if companies wanted to, they just couldn't because there isn't a supply chain for them to transition. So how much do a cage-free egg credit cost, right? So when you really look at an egg, like just pick up an egg, right? To pick up a conventional egg and a cage-free egg, there really isn't a difference between a conventional egg and a cage-free egg when you look at it from an egg to egg point of view. They both are just eggs. But when you look at a cage-free egg, there's a value add of it being cage-free. There's a claim that is attached to it that is cage-free. That's what makes it more expensive. So the so when you really look at it, when you look at a cage-free egg, it's got two components. It's got a value of just of a conventional egg because it's an egg, and then there is a value add of it being cage-free. So how does our system work? Producers produce these cage-free eggs, which has the value add, and they just sell them in the open market as caged eggs. They just sell them in the open market as caged eggs. So they get the value of conventional eggs. The value of cage free, the producer sells it as impact incentives. So the producer still gets the total value of cage free eggs. They both just don't get combined and they don't have to bother about creating a traceability through a complex supply chain. They basically produce cage free eggs, sell them in the open market as conventional eggs, and they keep the value of cage free and sell that separately as an impact incentive program. So how are these cage-free prices set? So obviously, from a competition point of view, the farmers have set their own prices. But what's the guiding formula is, okay, whatever is the at the farm level, so where you're removing all the cost of uh, transportation, whatever is the difference of cost of production between cost of cage-free eggs and caged eggs is the cost of impact incentive. So you will see that obviously it differs from different farms overall. A credit is about 1,000 eggs. And most importantly, it just eliminates the cost of transport and logistics. And it also, when it eliminates the cost of transport and logistics, it also eliminates the element of like risk as well as reliability when it comes to just like transport and logistics working with a new supplier from the from for the source cage free. So when you look at it from the food business's point of view, the 3 R's that we spoke about, right, is in it's now reasonably priced because they're not paying for transportation and logistics from a farm that's far away or from a smaller farm where they don't have the economies of scale working. They can be reliable because they continue to work with their existing cage supplier with whom they have a reliable relationship going on, and the resilience kind of continues. However, by buying credits, they are able to just like support farmers transition for cage free. So you kind of start seeing some of these benefits, right? Uh, you just offset your caged eggs usage with cage-free credits, so companies are able to fulfill their commitment. And most importantly, when animal welfare organizations are looking for trackers and report out as to whether a company has fulfilled their commitment or not, because that's one of the key motivators for these companies to fulfill cage-free commitments. They're able to report that they are 100% they've met their commitments overall. So we can take like a couple of case studies. One case study that I would like to take is, okay, lack of physical eggs and remote cost, right? So let's take China. So obviously, most of the population of China is in its coast. There could be many places where you have cage-free eggs available. Similarly, in India, Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi, Hyderabad, the metros, it's really easy to get physical cage-free eggs, no problem there. Similarly, with relation to Thailand and Philippines, where you have it in Manila. Now, there could also be places where it's really hard to get cage-free eggs. So, for example, Indonesia, because it's such a large island nation, you could probably get it in Jakarta, Surabaya, Yogyakarta, but might be hard to get across the island because just the nature of the archipelago is such. It also could be that in places where they are available, it costs a lot of money. So what we tell companies is that, okay, buy physical cage-free eggs wherever you can. So wherever you see these heart marks, you can buy these physical cage-free eggs, just buy them. And the places where you have a gap, just buy impact incentives and you can fulfill your commitment. So that's how it would work. Now, there is another case study that we could say here, right? As in you buy cage-free eggs, you then continue buying caged eggs and you offset impact incentives, and the companies have fulfilled their commitment. This is the map of Indonesia, just to kind of say, zoom this in. The 2 star marks that you see are locations where you have cage-free farms. So you have cage-free farms in Bali, there are cage-free farms in Java, in Central Java. But then you'll start seeing that, like, a resort in Bintan or in Sulawesi and other places, as in, how do you even get these eggs from this point to a resort here? And these companies have made cage-free commitments and they're looking for those. And in those situations, what companies do is just buy physical cage-free eggs in all the places that they can, and they basically buy cage-free credits in other places. So how does this whole thing work? We identify a producer, and the producer has to meet an animal welfare standard that we recognize. The cage-free eggs are produced and they're sold as conventional eggs. Then once we know that there's a certificate that when we onboard the producer and we say that, okay, you produced X amount of cage-free eggs and you sold them as cage-free, we issue a credit to them, like a certificate, which basically says that, yes, GFP certifies that farmer ABC has produced 100 cage-free eggs and sold them as caged. So they hold that certificate on. The buyer places the order. We then bring the buyer, seller, and us as facilitators. The buyer makes a payment and they just like they report that they have fulfilled their commitment. You kind of see that from a company's point of view, it's a very straightforward way in which they're able to fulfill their commitment. From a farmer's point of view, they can focus on setting up their farm, getting it certified, rather than trying to figure out how do we get these eggs delivered to really complex places. We also know that a lot of these offsetting systems have got some amount of brickbats, in the sense like, well, are they greenwashing? Are they humane washing and things like that? And for those reasons, we have come up with a lot of safeguards. So in our impact incentive system, there's transparent pricing. That basically means that the farmer exactly knows how much the company is paying. The company exactly knows how much the farmer is paying. There is no intermediary who is like buying credits at a lower price from the farmer and selling it to the higher price to the producer. None of that. It's a transparent pricing mechanism. We eliminate speculation, so there is no speculative trade allowed. There is a fair sharing of profits between the farmers as well as other people who are involved, like certifiers, facilitators, so on and so forth. What we always do is when a company wants to buy credits, we encourage them to buy from farms that could, at scale, supply physical eggs to them. So we call that the jurisdictional approach. And with that, what happens is there is a pathway to physical sourcing. And again, since you're not buying out of an exchange and it's a facilitated trade, the buyers exactly know which producer they're supplying. And that also builds the trust and reliability overall. And we've seen a big amount of uptake happening. So Kellanova, which owns Kellogg's, they basically have said that to meet their transition from cage-free, they're adding a third component to their responsible sourcing, which is cage-free credits. Similarly, Compass Group, this is two amongst many companies who have made a commitment that for places where they can't fulfill their animal welfare commitment by 100% physical, they would end up buying credits. This is another company you'll see here that they were facing a considerable amount of challenge. And so they ended up buying these cage-free credits. So overall, this company buys 62% of physical eggs and 38% of credits. And with credits, you'll see that company that was stuck at about 64, 68% for the past 2 years was able to quickly move to 97%. So you get Lagarde. Lagarde was like 0% cage-free in Asia. They reached to 67% by combination of credits as well as physical. So that's how a company can like really help push their commitment. And a vast majority of animal welfare organizations support these programs. So as I said earlier, a big reasoning for these commitments to have come and to be implemented are the trackers as well as a lot of engagement that's done through animal welfare NGO stakeholders. And we have support from all of these companies. And we're seeing also farm change. So for example, this is a farmer in Vietnam. So they had over 40,000 birds in cages. Through our impact incentive system, they have now transitioned their entire operation, or they've transitioned a vast majority of their flock and soon will transition their entire production to cage-free. And this is just one example of many farmers that we have. So if you go on our website, Global Food Partners /Impact Incentives, incentives you'll see in all the regions, Indonesia, China, Thailand, India. We have farms who have basically transitioned to cage-free or are able to supply physical eggs as well as credits to companies who want to buy. So it's Global Food Partners /incentives. So overall, you'll see from an effectiveness point of view, this by offering companies a solution where they don't have to battle a really complex supply chain, removes a reason for not complying with animal welfare commitment. What it also does is just creates that economic incentive for the farmer to transition to cage-free. Again, as you said, for animal welfare to be viable, it has to be economically viable. And for a longest period of time, we've seen like animal welfare not really addressing these market concerns. So at GFP, what we are really pushing is, can we just use the markets? Can we create the path of least resistance where money is able to be given to farmer for them to transition? Obviously, does it mean that the egg that a person is consuming is cage-free? It does not. But does it? But that should not be a inhibition for somebody who wants to transition to cage-free, and we provide this market mechanism for farmers and companies to transition. This is my contact. So if you need to reach me on WhatsApp, LinkedIn, email, please feel free to scan this code. And yeah, thanks so much. And over to Keller. If there's any follow-up questions, any clarifications, happy to do that. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. That was definitely interesting. And yeah, I think I walked in with a fair bit of skepticism, and you really answered a lot of my questions. I think the main one that I sort of the first one that I still want to ask about is what does your auditing procedure look like? Because that sort of seems like the obvious thing where a firm could say, "Oh yeah, no, we're definitely selling these as caged," and then slap a cage-free label through a different group. So, what's your solution there?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much, Keller. So, um, that's probably one of the hardest point in terms of just certification. So the way we work is we work with benchmark third-party certifiers. So certification agencies come in all size and forms, and not all of them are equal. So you do have um, so we have a benchmarking program, and we benchmark different standards. And in Asia, one of the standards that are very prevalent is certified humane, run by this group called as Humane Farm Animal Care (HFAC). And so we work with them. And the reason why they meet our benchmark is when we benchmark a standard, we benchmark them on two things. One is just the animal welfare standard itself. And the second is the standards implementation, which also means like how much of entry level, like production level and overselling protection do you have? So we work very closely with these third-party standards who have inspectors who go and check their books. Now, is it foolproof? Nothing's foolproof. Like, even large companies like Nike and Adidas can't get counterfeit off the market. So it isn't foolproof, but within our terms and condition, we do have systems where we are able to like either claw back money, get the money back and stuff like that if we find that a farmer is cheating. But we are fairly confident because the most of the farms that we work with end up being only cage-free farms or like cage farms who are transitioning to cage-free. And these are farms with whom Global Food Partners is providing technical support, and we've been there. So there's obviously that personal connection that we have with these farmers. But when it comes to scale, obviously that personal connect is not going to matter. At those stages, we are going to be heavily dependent on certified humane to ensure that the farm's actually certified and they're not overselling.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Elaborating on that a little, if you don't mind, how do the egg farmers feel about going cage free? Sort of, how sympathetic are they to animal welfare in general? Is this sort of something where you're just pitching the price, or how is there a moral component that they are sympathetic to?
So I think egg farmers are human beings like us. And I think a lot of times people don't wake up in the morning. An egg farmer does not wake up in the morning and think that, okay, let me find the most cruel way to keep the bird. Like, I don't think that's their motivation, right? And I do think that a lot of times activists and us, we tend to demonize farmers, saying that, oh my God, such cruel people. They aren't like this. They're basically following a system that they have known. They work with large companies and they basically have optimized for cheap eggs. That's it. Like, that's basically what it is. And from a farmer's point of view, they'll do whatever that is required that will get them to keep their business running. And it's not like a super profitable business either. I think a lot of the times egg farmers work on like razor thin margin. So they'll do whatever is required. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when you really look at the cage-free commitments, right, there are three people who are involved. There's a company that has made a commitment to buy. You have NGOs who put pressure on the companies to buy, and then you have the farmer who has to transition. The farmer is the one who has most of the skin in the game because they are the ones who have to go get a mortgage, take a loan, move their caged operations to cage free. And if people don't buy, they are in a deep mess. Like they still have to pay their loans off. Like if a company makes a commitment, pushes their commitment by 5 years, they have some reputational risk, but they'll continue because the end consumers really are not like looking for cage free eggs all the time, right? NGOs will continue campaigning, maybe run another run of fundraising, but the farmer is the one who loses the most. So, from a farmer's point of view, I think it isn't a moral question for them, it's a survival question as to whether transitioning from cage to cage free will continue to keep their farms in an economically viable mode. And wherever we have provided good economic incentives, farmers have changed. So, primarily, I think this isn't a moral question, this is a economic question.
That makes sense. And then continuing on that theme of sort of moral feelings, I'm curious, I'm guessing you have survey data that consumers feel fairly satisfied with that, but I admit I'm a little surprised. Or have you done surveys on consumer attitudes towards this?
So, so consumers are like you have that citizen consumer dilemma, right? When it comes to consumers. So when you do a survey, when you do attitude survey, willingness to buy surveys, consumers always will vote the right way. Like you just walk in and show a battery cage and say, "Hey, is it okay to keep these animals this way?" They're like, "No." But that's their citizen hat. But when they go to a supermarket aisle or an Instamart, are they shopping with their citizen hat on or are they shopping with their consumer hat on? That's the question. And I think I wouldn't want to like brush all consumers the same, but I'm sure there are like a majority, some fraction of consumers who go to like Whole Foods or organic markets or eat at places which are like farm to fork and stuff like that, who put on their citizen hat even when they in their consumption practices. But I wouldn't say that that's the vast majority, or like even like percentage, a significant percentage of the consumers, right? So in that sense, when you really start looking at what's motivating companies to buy cage-free eggs, of course, yes, consumers, brand value, and all of that. But finally, what's really motivating them is campaigns run by groups like the Humane League, the Open Wing Alliance, Mercy for Animals, so on and so forth, and the trackers that they have, and wanting to just like come or compassion in World Farming's tracker, or the business benchmark for farm animal welfare. So there's a lot of that pressure, and also investors are asking these questions as well. So I think the lever for the business, of course, is consumer and brand perception, but I think it just goes beyond that in terms of just like reputation risk with other stakeholders. So does the end consumer feel confident about, oh, this egg that I'm eating is actually caged eggs, but it supports production of cage free somewhere? I don't think so. I feel like that's a really hard jump for an end consumer to make. But as long as other stakeholders who are impressing on these companies to go cage free understand and support it, we see companies uptake. Now, there could be companies who basically say, nope, we only want physical cage-free eggs and nobody really is stopping them from doing. It's just that the counterfactual of not having these credits is that companies will say, credits, cage-free eggs not available, we'll do nothing. Now we can say, okay, cage-free eggs not available by credits. So there's an alternate option that will get the same number of birds out of cages.
And it also means that, yeah, you sort of diffused a counter argument that people might try to use to avoid making a cage free commitment.
That's right.
Okay.
Does it stop somebody from being like a super Puritan approach and say that no, 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 we only will provide physical cage-free XM, but we'll do nothing till the point of time? Obviously not. That primarily also means that this company probably wants to do nothing about it. They're just using that as an
Yeah.
excuse. But in most cases, it removes out a counter argument to do nothing.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I suppose I've got one last question, though. People really are strongly encouraged, like, say more questions. I think I'm finding this really interesting and really inspiring. So, one of the concerns that someone raised is that you're working with individual farms to ease some of the transition issues you're talking about. But some of the logistics and transportation networks that are critical to what you're talking about are not getting benefited because there's sort of none of that low level work. And you okay? Yeah, I figured you had a response. I wanted to ask it.
Yeah, you're right. We are not touching the supply chain and we're not correcting the supply chain at this point of time. I think uh, in an evolution of any commodity from where it is now to sustainability, the production practices are like really the most important element. So at this stage, we're like purely focusing on the production practice. What we believe is that once you have a sizable amount of farms with good production practice, and typically they cluster because of the ecosystem, then you have the volumes. The volumes can then kick into working with a distributor, processor, traceability, physical supply chain, all of that, because that entire middle path, right, the belly of the supply chain is volume driven. So the cost to transport 1,000 cage-free eggs or 10,000 cage-free eggs does not proportionally increase, right? So so you kind of, or like even in terms of just like setting up of a farm, right? So let's say you have a ventilation fan that goes on both ends of the farm. So the ventilation fan, the cost to set up for like a 5,000 bird and a 50,000 bird is the same. So it's the same cost, same fan that is there. So just from a capital expenditure point of view, realize that you need the scale to bring the price down. So in that sense, we completely agree. We're working on the production side, not tackling the supply chain at this particular point of time. We believe that the tackling of the supply chain will need to happen once there is a sizable change that happens on the production size. At this point of time, there isn't a big sizable change on the production side to focus on a complex belly of the supply chain.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Uh, and then what does that cost difference look like right now, and what do you expect it to be? Is there something you can say without breaking confidential and commercial secrets?
Yeah. So then it ends up being about 30% of the cost of cage decks. So it's a 30% increase on their P&L. I think a lot of time companies are like, well, we're looking to buy cage free, but we want like no financial impact on our P&L. And we're like, no, doesn't work that way. The as I said, in places where the transition has happened, we've seen that the lowest difference is about 23%. Now we're seeing with our credits, we're seeing the so if a cage deck costs $1, then the cost of the credit is about 30 cents, or it could also be lower. Now or higher, depends, but I think it's about 30% is where we want to keep that at. We don't fix the cost of these credits because they are fixed by market driven by the producer as well as companies. So is there a possibility of it going down? At scale, it can definitely go down, no problem on that at all. So that's where that's how the pricing is at this.
Okay, thank you. That okay. That all right. So we do still have room for more audience questions, and I would really love to see them. But right now, I will just sort of indulge myself and say, when you're thinking about the process for sort of getting everyone, what was your main difficulty in getting all of these wide-ranging stakeholders, some of whom are somewhat opposed, range of countries? How did you get them to sort of walk through this all together? You've got a lot of players, and you are sort of playing this really critical intermediary role, which is always a challenge. And I'm curious what you found surprising or difficult, or you're like, yeah, no, I've done this 5 times before. It was all easy.
Yeah, I think when we started off, we thought that the farmers would be the most difficult piece of the puzzle. They ended up being the easiest piece of the puzzle, actually. So the farmers were like, well, give us the money, give us the purchase order, we'll do whatever you want. That was easy from a farmer's point of view. We always knew that the companies are going to be hard because companies are just intrinsically motivated to do whatever is like the lowest in terms of their cost. So we knew that companies were not going to be like jump and say, yes, we need credits. And the reason why we are seeing the orders of credits start coming in now is because 2025 is where most of the cage free commitments are due. So companies are doing what they needed to do by 2025. We weren't expecting them to start complying before 2025. So what we ended up doing was that our initial years of existence as an organization was to create that supply, physical as well as the farms, because we started off, for example, in Indonesia, when we started, there was zero certified cage-free farms. And there were two existing cage-free, actually, there was one existing cage-free farm, and they didn't even meet certification standard, like in terms of like if they were to get audited. So today we have 30 cage-free farms for certified, a cage-free association in Indonesia. Similarly, in China, we are now working with second largest egg producer in China, helping them transition their cage-free farm. So we created the supply by providing technical support to farmers. So that's where our model farms and training center that we have in India, China, Indonesia, and plus we have like scientific staff who go on farm and provide that support. Help with like we have people who can like draw, design, like architects who will help you like remodel your cage farm to cage free, all of that. The hardest actually ended up being NGO stakeholders. You kind of realize that the NGO stakeholders cared more about whether the egg was actually cage free or not than like the end consumer who actually cared. Because they were like, oh, well, should this not actually be cage free? And also, we realized that with some NGO stakeholders, and they're not all, there was something wrong in making the transition easy. They'd be like, what's your opposition to credits? They'd be like, oh, well, it makes it really easy. And we're like, isn't that the whole thing? Like, just let's make it easy because I guess the counterfactual there was like, well, if you keep it hard, then companies would like maybe start sourcing plant-based, which we had no evidence to believe that, if cage-free was hard, companies would like say, instead of defaulting to caged eggs, they would like make the giant leap and start going to all protein. So I guess what really convinced the companies of the NGOs was our relatable role models where we were able to show like in Vietnam, hey, listen, here's the cage farmer credits. They're now cage free. So start showing that at the bird level, it really matters. It helps. Even to this day, um, we continue to keep that focus on farm and talk to stakeholders on that. And I guess like that's what gets NGOs and other stakeholders on board because it's all focused on farm technical support.
Okay, yeah, that was not what I would have expected, so thank you very much. Definitely interesting to have that answer and think a little more seriously about what that looks like. You said that the commitments are sort of starting to come due in 2025. What do you think that looks like over the next couple of years? What is your roadmap looking like?
So um, obviously 2025 is when these companies have to meet their cage free commitments. That also means that they have to continue to meet their cage free commitments beyond 2025, right? It's not just like 2025 and it's all done. So, but beyond 2025, what we really are going to continue to focus is local Asian companies. So there are like a plenty of major Asian agribusiness, some of them who have commitments, most who don't have commitments. So we want to start having conversations with them. So I think that because that's where the scale really comes, because till now it's all been international companies that operate in Asia. We are also now focusing a lot more on transition. In our initial years, we were like, well, if a farmer is like, I don't want to transition my cage to cage free farm, but I just want to set up a new barn. We were like, sure, we'll support you with that. Obviously, we'll continue to support that, but we want to push and create a special priority support funding for companies who want to, or farmers who want to transition. We're also looking at setting up a transition fund where we can like give interest-free loans or something like that to get farmers. So obviously, the initial pool we are building through philanthropy. So again, any philanthropists who are listening to this, please feel free to reach out. We are building this pool fund not as a grant, but just a fund to give money to transition. Then we claw it back by sale of credits and reinvest it in transition because that's the only way we are able to catalyze in many places. So yeah, that's what our focus is going to be beyond 2025.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and there is actually an audience question, so thank you for that, that just came in. Basically on that topic, asking about what your funding model looks like. Like, are you getting consulting fees from any of the companies that you're working with or the firms?
Yeah.
Is it all
So
donations?
so most of our work to farms are pro bono. We do not charge farmers because it kind of goes back to the three people who are involved. Farmers have most skin in the game. So I think that's primarily. But we do sometimes charge like for our out-of-pocket fees of like traveling, having somebody go there. So sometimes when the first birds come in, we have our staff stay on farm for like a week. So those kind of expenses are being borne by the farmer. We have three sources of funding. We are funded by philanthropy. Definitely. We started off, and I think a big chunk of the work that we did getting the farms set up, transition certificate ready was all funded by philanthropy. We take a transparent 10% facilitation fee for the sale of all credits. So it's a fixed 10%. So that's obviously is one of our revenue model. And in places where companies are not buying credits and they're looking for a roadmap for transition, we also charge a fee. So we have a very hybrid model where we're funded by philanthropy and through a sale of credits and consultancy.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, and this is going to be one of my own. Maybe I'm being a little indulgent here, but I am kind of curious. When I hear this, one of the things I want to my mind is there international arbitrage? If egg prices, if cage free versus caged egg is a relatively constant multiple, is there an incentive to sell the cage free eggs as caged in Indonesia and then vice versa in China, or are you doing it more all within one country?
So we implement jurisdiction approach a lot. So companies can only buy credits from farms from whom they could hypothetically source cage physical eggs to prevent on that arbitrage. So it's a safety mechanism that we have. So what the last thing that we want is, let's say in Europe, in Netherlands, a company then starts to buy cheap Romanian caged eggs, buy cheap cage-free credits from Indonesia and say all done. Uh, that would like basically kill the European cage-free markets, right? So we do not allow that. So we have a very, very, very strict jurisdiction approach. So if you're a company, let's say Singapore, which almost produces nothing, but most companies import their eggs from either Thailand or Malaysia or maybe Indonesia, then you can buy credits from Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. Now, if there is a country that does not import any eggs at all, then you couldn't buy credits from another country. And again, we look at what their commodity is. For example, liquid eggs or processed eggs, like powdered eggs, are heavily traded commodities. So that means that you could buy from a processor, like a Japanese buyer could buy from India because there's already a trade that happens. So when a company comes on board and say, well, we want to buy credits, we map what their hypothetical physical supply chain could look like, and we'll suggest credits only from those places. And that's the safeguard that we have against arbitrage.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I have the question. You clearly have a good answer, so thank you for that. I've got another audience question for you. I'm curious how you think about choosing which farms to work with. How much of it is sort of who is currently willing and able to work with you? However, it's just sort of like, okay, man, we've got to have this demand in this area in 3 years. What do those factors look like for you?
I think it's like anybody who wants to work with us, as long as they have a sizable number. We do not work with micro, small scale farmers. Just from a scale point of view, does not make sense for us. So if like there's a farm who's like, oh, we have 500 birds, we'll not work with them. If there's a cluster of like 50 farms of 500 birds each, we'll work with them. So I think volume is a big division for us because, again, from our point of view, to provide technical support, the number of human resource required for a 500 bird farm and a 50,000 bird farm doesn't increase tenfold. So we obviously want to keep our staff time for larger scale. We also prioritize cage to cage free transition versus somebody who is new. We also deprioritize somebody who's like, well, I'm actually a strawberry farmer and I want to set up a cage free farm. We'll only work with them if we know that the counterfactual of us not supporting is going to be that they'll end up setting up a caged farm. Then we'll support, but we're not going to actively encourage a strawberry farmer to transition to cage-free farm. So that's like the model.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I've got an audience question that I don't know much about, so I'll just ask it fairly directly. Can you talk about the Asia Accountability Initiative and how that org is related to GFP?
Ish, we are not related to any of the stakeholder organizations at all. And that could include, there are many accountability initiatives. This could be Asia Accountability Initiative, the Bharat Accountability Initiative, the Humane League, Compassion in World Farming. Our relation to all of these companies, all of these accountability initiatives and such is purely to get their buy-in on credits, because finally the last thing that you really want, or buy-in on our physical sourcing as well. Like the last thing that we want is companies buy these credits, but they continue to be focus of campaigns. Then like companies are like, well, why did we even spend this money? So that's where our real focus is. But as far as any NGO stakeholder, we do not like work with them directly, other than the fact that if they'll have any questions, I obviously have questions, right? In the sense like, is it humane washing? Is it actually helping? Stuff like that. So our role is purely of building capacity of farmers on ground, working with companies to help transition for physical as well as credits. So that's basically it. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got 5 minutes left. So if you've had a burning audience question, is an excellent time to ask it. I'm going to indulge in one of the standard interview closer questions that I've heard because I think it's good practice. What are the questions that you don't get asked enough, or that you feel like people should be asking you out?
I think I think one of the questions that I think a lot of time people don't understand is like how much welfare improvement actually happens from a cage to cage free. So people think that it's actually marginal. And it may not be within the EA community or farm animal community. I think largely people are like, it's still, these birds are still inside a confined space. So I think just to understand that from an animal welfare perspective, just getting these birds out of cages, a huge welfare improvements. And I think the Welfare Footprint Project has done some really good work on that. On just like quantifying suffering. Now, is cage-free cruelty-free? Definitely not. But is the improvement just in margin? Definitely not. There's a huge welfare improvement that happens when a bird goes from cage to cage free. So hence, and the other thing is that I know that a lot of people are like, well, this would just be easy for companies to go plant-based. It isn't. It as in eggs are such versatile ingredients. They're really, really, really hard to replace, and they're also pretty cheap. So in that sense, just the focus on cage-free in terms of just like improving animal welfare and a tractable way to improve animal welfare. Like if there's one problem that we need to be solving is cage-free eggs for now, and then maybe shrimp next.
Yeah, no, no. Definitely, when people are like, oh, we simply have egg alternatives, I'm like, I don't think you use eggs that much in baking and cooking and buy them at a grocery store on a regular basis, even at like rich country egg prices, let alone in Indonesia or China. So, yeah, no, I absolutely in full agreement with you that, and I appreciate that as a aiming for thinking about it. So I do want to flag for anyone who is in the audience. The next thing is office hours, and so instead of me having to be an intermediary between all of your questions and Jaya, you can just ask them directly, and the link for that is going to be presumably available on Swapcard, so you can go to that. Uh, and then I'm not seeing any more audience questions, and so my apologies that so I'm going to continue to indulge myself and ask one more question about what you've been doing. So you talked about how you've talked mostly about Asian walk. I'm curious, do you want to expand into Africa and South America and other developing nations, or are you thinking, no, we have an expertise and a network here. We mostly want to just keep doing it here. If someone else wants to copy us, great, we'll chat, but we know what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's what we want to do. Like we work very closely with African advocates. So in fact, we hosted over 30 animal welfare advocates from Africa in our model farm in Indonesia for a training. So we have a model, a skeleton how things can be done. They should adapt it in their places. I think it makes no sense for us to be there. We definitely are looking at Middle East because I think that's a heavily neglected place. Middle East, North Africa, again, I think Middle East and North Africa is something that we might be interested in exploring. But just with like China, Indonesia, India, we have like or three-fourths of the world's animals in our care and custody, for lack of a better word. Yeah, I think that's where we're going to focus. But uh, we've had requests from, so our credits are available in Latin America. So that's no problem. So there, if a company in like Mexico, Brazil, uh, uh, if companies want to buy credits, but I think there are some places where physical X are available, especially Brazil, we are. And in fact, a lot of times companies who are looking for credits from Middle East will end up buying credits from Brazil because that's where the supply chain is. I think a lot of the eggs to the Middle East comes from Brazil. So we do have credit sellers in Latin America, but we don't do any extensive like on-farm technical support there. We just work with existing certified farms to service mostly Middle East.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I do not have a detailed mental map of the egg supply chain and flows of our different countries, so I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. I looks like we are out of time, so thank you very much. We are heading into office hours next. I don't actually know the procedure for this, so I'm just gonna stay on here and say thank you very much, and I hope everyone else will join me in saying thank you for a very interesting and very informative talk, Jaya.
Thank you so much, Keller. Thanks everyone for joining, and
Of
look you
course.
forward to meeting in the office hours.